My Lords, if I may, I would like to speak, as it were, in anticipation of the valedictory speech of the noble and learned Lord Mackay of Clashfern before I move to the terms of this bill. Like all members of the House who are here present, that I much look forward to hearing the valedictory address. But I think, like all other members of the House here, I do so with sadness. This is the last time we'll hear the noble and learned Lord speaking from our benches. I am, I think, in a rather special position, although I do see, I think, at least two noble lords who were here in 43 years ago in 1979, but I'm the only one. I see that both of the noble peers are nodding, so I'm correct in that assumption. But I am the only person who's put his name down to speak in this debate, who was here when the noble and learned Lord arrived here 43 years ago in 1979 as the new Lord Advocate, coming, as I recall, from being Dean of the Faculty in Edinburgh. Moreover, my Lords, very shortly after his arrival in this House, I had the honour of working very closely with him on the Protection of Trading Interests Bill of 1980. And I think the noble and learned Lord will remember that bill, it was quite tough on him to take on that bill, which was a complicated one, so soon after his arrival in the House. I believe, actually, the then Lord Chancellor, Lord Hailsham, funked taking on this task, although those are not words that the noble and learned Lord has ever used to me. The nature of this bill was to protect a major UK company from the ravages of US antitrust law. Not that the entry into the area of anti-US antitrust laws deterred the noble and learned Lord with his swift intellect. But I had just come back to this House after 4.5 years practicing law in New York, and I knew something about antitrust law, and I hope I was helpful. Later, I remember working with the noble Lord when Lord Chancellor on another very complicated bill, the Human Fertilization and Embryology Bill of 1990. And once again, such a bill needed his great intellect. My clear memory of the noble and learned Lord throughout his time in this House was of his great intellect and great stamina. At no time was this exhibited more clearly than during the passage of the Courts and Legal Services Bill of 1990. It started with a Green Paper debate on a Friday, I suppose it must have been in early 1990. And I will explain the circumstances of that in a moment. The Thatcher government, after sorting out the trade unions, somewhat bravely decided to sort out the legal profession. It was agreed that the beginning of this sorting out should be formed in a Green Paper, a discussion paper, which was put before the House. It was therefore on this Friday, sometime early in 1990, we convened at 10 a.m. and must have gone on to past 10 p.m., 11 p.m., perhaps just up to midnight. It was quite an eventful beginning because the bishop wasn't here and the noble and learned Lord had to do the prayers before we could start our business on that day. But thereafter, he sat on the woolsack down there almost the whole day, never leaving the woolsack, always listening to the argument and patiently, not even taking any notes, but patiently listening to all that had been said. He was there for 12 to 13 or 14 hours and ended up very late at night, using again, as I mentioned, hardly a note, a brilliant contemporary, extempore summing up. It was not altogether an easy debate for the noble and learned Lord. The legal profession on the bar side were furious with the provisions being proposed by the government of the day, and so were many members of the judiciary. As it happened, and just exactly on the seat I think the noble and learned Lord Judge is sitting, I was sitting next door to Lord Lane, Geoffrey Lane, the Lord Chief Justice, and he rose, standing as I sat beside him, and turned on the Lord Chancellor and said he didn't even have the courtesy to write to him about these measures before introducing the Green Papers. But what the noble and learned Lord Lane had not taken into account was the enormously good memory of Lord Mackay, because he remembered that sometime earlier, when the Green Papers were being produced, he had a handwritten letter from Lord Lane to say that he didn't think it was appropriate as Lord Chief Justice to be involved in these discussions of these proposals. That placed the noble Lord Lane in a rather awkward position, but with his characteristic kindness, that the noble and learned Lord only raised that issue in his final summing up in a very tactful way, just referring to having received this letter. Not only was the noble learned Lord under attack from Lord Lane, he was under a greater attack from Lord Donaldson, who was then Master of the Rolls, who actually used the words, "Take your tanks off my lawn." And again, the noble Lord received that with great good temper and very wisely. I remember having the privilege of seeing the noble and learned Lord when he was just finishing as Lord Chancellor. It was sometime in 1997, as the general election had been announced, and he very kindly agreed that I could have a brief word with him before he departed from office. Thereafter, the noble and learned Lord moved to where he is now sitting on this bench immediately behind the ministers. And it's a bench that he has used over the years, the many years. I wasn't here for 22 years, but I saw it again. I saw it from 1997 onwards until I left in 1999, and then saw it again when I returned to your lordships. And every so often, the noble Lord stands up and gives some wise words of wisdom. I'm a bit worried now for the government ministers who are no longer going to have those wise words of wisdom to guide them through their business. But I'm afraid they've got to just live with that, because the noble and learned Lord will be leaving us. I'd just like to bring everything up to date, because on Monday this week, in the schools bill, the noble Lord was sitting exactly where he was throughout this rather long debates on the schools bill. He didn't intervene, but he was still sitting there. My lords, I think it's about time I turned to the bill itself, and I do so. I was in the Royal Navy, and I remember, as indeed the noble Lord sitting opposite was also a national serviceman in the Royal Navy with me, and he may have been guilty of the sin that I'm just about to pass on to the House, or the information thereof. And I remember in the Royal Navy we saw a lot of commercial ships, and we saw the seamen coming off at various ports all around the world. And we all did wonder how well they were being treated, what were their wages, and were they being kept in very difficult and squalid circumstances. I can't say, and this is why I'm looking towards the noble Lord Gillis, because he was out in the Far East and I wasn't, and therefore I wasn't guilty of this sin. But in the Far East, the Navy considered that they weren't very good with their washing, and Chinese personnel were taken on board our ships while we were out in the Far East. May have been taken on one of the ships that Lord, I'll give him an answer to a reply, may have been taken on by one of the ships in which the noble Lord was an officer. And they were just kept there, not in very good quarters. I don't know anything about their pay. And then they were kind of dumped when the ship was moving back from the Far East. But my lords, on the terms of this bill, it seems to me, even though my Navy days are long over, it seems to me that this is a sound bill and a bill that should be supported.
Yeah.